Welcome to Monday Morning Reaction presented by MetaQuest. I'm Mitch, here to give you the 5 NFL contenders and the 5 pretenders. The legit and the teams that I simply do not feel are legit. They are fake. So let's go through it. We got some honorable mentions and some dishonorable mentions for each list. Contender can simply be organized by the teams that I actually feel have a legitimate chance to go far in the playoffs and to win the Super Bowl. The teams that are pretenders are teams that actually look like they're probably going to make the playoffs. They have good standing right now. They have good records, but they're artificial. They're teams that I simply do not feel will go far in the playoffs. So let's start it off with the contender list. The best teams in football, the teams that I feel can go the furthest in the playoffs. The honorable mentions, we're going to begin with the 49ers. The 49ers did not make my contender list simply due to their inconsistency and their record. I feel like this is a team that's 5-4. They just won a big game against Tampa Bay on the road to get to 5-4, above 500, and put themselves in position for a late season run. We've seen the 49ers do this many times in their recent history. And they are also statistically a good football team. They're 4th in offensive EPA, 12th in defensive EPA, and that also follows through in yardage. 2nd on offense, 10th on defense. This is a talented team. Christian McCaffrey just came back for the first time this season. If they put all the pieces together with Trent Williams and Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, and they continue to get healthy with Dre Greenlaw, Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Ricky Pearsall looked really good. And if they get a good version of Brock Purdy, this is a dark horse. This is a team that has playoff success that nobody wants to see in the NFC. With Kyle Shanahan scheming it up, they are always dangerous in a one-game format. So they might not be playing their best, but they're still very dangerous. That's why they're a contender. The Houston Texans are my other honorable mention. The Texans, we saw their potential last night. They can go toe-to-toe with the best teams in the NFL. And they did that against the Lions. They were up 23-7 at half, I believe, against a Lions team that I honestly think if they had Nico Collins, never mind also Will Anderson, they win that game running away against the Detroit Lions, a team that a lot of people have number 1 in their power rankings, or at least number 2. Right? So the Texans have a deadly pass rush when their full unit is healthy. Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter, Danico Autry, who's been fantastic since returning from his suspension. They're going to get Mario Edwards back. They haven't had Christian Harris back at linebacker yet to go along with Al-Shaair, who played fantastic last night. Jimmy Ward was back. Their defense is legitimately elite when they have their full unit out there. They didn't last night, and they were dominating the Lions for the first 3 quarters of that game. The offense is a lot of CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. And right now, CJ is simply missing his guy, and he's having to deal with a bad offensive line in front of him. But with Joe Mixon running the rock, he's been explosive all season. The Texans have a great formula of explosive offense and dominant defense that can do a lot of things in a playoff format. So watch out for the Texans as the season goes on. We're going to see them play the Chiefs, the Ravens. We'll see where they line up entering the playoffs in January. The first real contender, moving on from the honorable mentions, the Detroit Lions, who just face the Houston Texans. The Detroit Lions are obviously a contender, but why are they a contender? I think whenever you have a team that can play in all styles of a game, and this is what I think the Lions have in terms of what their difference is in Detroit from last year to this year. They now have a team that can play a bit of defense. We've seen their defense play against the Texans, dominate that second half, allow their offense to find their way, get back in the game. We've seen, even without Aiden Hutchinson, this defense rally together. Aaron Glenn get them on the same page. And they dominate the line of scrimmage. They're very good against the run on defense, but they're dominant running the football. And when you're dominant running the football, you can go on the road and win games. You can play at home and dictate the pace of the game. You can also set up your quarterback for success because he's in, better third down situations. Not as many 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 10s, like CJ Stroud for the Texans was on the other side because of the Lions' run defense. I think they have a slightly better secondary. Their safeties are playing much better ball this year. Even Brian Branch, who was great as a rookie, Carlton Davis has given them a legitimate corner on the outside. And the offense, Jamison Williams has improved. Maybe Sam Laporta is not playing to the same level, but Jahmyr Gibbs has improved. And this is the best Jared Goff we've ever seen. So the Lions are a legit contender in every way, shape, or form because they are so good at the line of scrimmage. They're so good on the offensive line. They run you over. And Jared Goff, I know he had 5 picks last week, but for the rest of the season, he's barely had 5 incompletions. The Kansas City Chiefs are the next contender on the list. They are undefeated. They are the reigning, defending, multi-time, repeat Super Bowl champions. If you don't know that they're a contender, you probably have not been watching football over the past, 6 or 7 years. They have Andy Reid, who is unanimously the best coach in the NFL. They have Steve Spagnuolo, who I think is unanimously the best defensive coordinator in football. And a lot of people, they talk about Patrick Mahomes and they talk about Travis Kelce and maybe Chris Jones. But it starts with that. It starts with the coaching. It starts with the fact that in any given playoff game, they can out-coach you on offense. They can out-coach you on defense with Andy Reid and Steve Spags tying that together. And their special teams can also come through and make a play like a blocked field goal for the win on a 35-yard attempt. I don't know how many times I've seen a 35-yard attempt for the win be actually blocked. That never happens. But of course, it happens for the Chiefs because they're better prepared than everybody else. It's kind of like the Patriots. My Patriots during the dynasty, it's like they just found ways to win. Even when it wasn't pretty, they found ways to win. This Chiefs team, I think they have a top 3 defense, maybe the best defense in the league. They're better against the run this year than last year. Trent McDuffie's a legit corner 1. They've got one of the best linebacker crews in football. And Chris Jones and George Karlaftis are dominating the front. Plus, they added a guy like Josh Uche to help that pass rush out. And the offense is not as explosive, but they're very consistent. They can run the ball a little bit with power. They've got an excellent interior offensive line, the best in football. Mahomes makes magic happen on 3rd down and in the 4th quarter, and that's plenty enough for the Chiefs to succeed in the playoffs. If they play elite defense where they're clutchy, they're grabby on offense and defense a little bit, they don't get called for those holdings in that one game situation where refs don't want to play a part, right? That plays into the Chiefs' hands because that actually lessens the impact of their tackle position, which is probably their biggest weakness on their team. And they're a little bit clutchy and grabby on the secondary. So DeAndre Hopkins has really helped too. Just give them another guy that can move the chains. So the Chiefs certainly still in conversation for getting that 3-peat. The Buffalo Bills are next up. And I love the Bills this year. I can't wait to see this game against the Kansas City Chiefs. It's going to tell us a lot for where they line up in the AFC. I think their biggest weakness on their football team is their run defense, and we saw that exposed against the Ravens. But outside of that, I think they kind of line up similarly to the Chiefs. They're just a more explosive version. They might not have the dominant defense the Chiefs have, but their offense is light years better. And what I like about potential Super Bowl champions is balance and well-roundedness to your team. So the Bills have a top 10 offense, a top 10 defense. They're top 3 in giveaways. Offensively, they don't give it away as much this year. They're top 4 in takeaways. They're top 5 in starting position on special teams. They've had 5 straight wins this season, with 4 of them 30 points or more. So the Buffalo Bills, they can score, they can throw it, they can run it, they can protect on offense. Josh Allen can go superhuman, or he could just hand it off and they can win. They can play defense. They can be, a rushing the passer team. They can be a team that's great in coverage. The only area I would really say that they need to improve throughout the rest of the season is run defense. If they can fix that, they can win the Super Bowl without a doubt, because they have arguably, right now, the guy that can overcome the most at the quarterback position. And especially when it gets cold in those winter months, in January, he can run the ball as well. So the Bills, they've got the chemistry, they've got the experience. They can take the Super Bowl this year if they play this way for the rest of the season. The Baltimore Ravens are the next team. The Ravens are a team that I think they're weird because I wouldn't look at the Ravens and say they are necessarily perfect. They're well-rounded, right? But I would also say that they're so explosive and so dynamic that they can win the Super Bowl. Cash says Kansas City is going to get exposed soon. They got a lucky block. I definitely think they're a little bit lucky, but it also, champions are lucky. I mean, how many times were the Chiefs lucky last year? It just lucked them all the way to the Super Bowl. So I don't know if it's luck or if they're just prepared. I will say that, right? Like, yeah, sure, 35-yard field goal block is kind of lucky. Not going to lie. But sometimes you got to be a little bit lucky. You're not going to play perfect every time. The Chiefs are winning a lot of close games. The Ravens are the opposite. The Ravens are a team that they win a lot of blowouts. They just destroy teams. But they also let a lot of teams back into games. And that's because they have right now a crippling weakness. Their pass defense, I think, ranks last in the NFL in terms of yardage allowed. Their pass rush isn't exactly explosive. And their secondary gives up easy plays down the field to number one receivers like Jamar Chase going for nearly 300 yards in a single game. So they can be exposed on defense, but you've got to be able to stop and slow down Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, or it doesn't matter. That's the thing with the Ravens being a contender. Obviously, they have a Super Bowl winning coach. They have a lot of ballers on defense, despite them not playing up to the level of expectation. Madubuike, Roquan Smith, Kyle Hamilton, Marcus Williams, Marlon Humphrey, Kyle Van Noy even. Like, they're playing. They have the guys. They have the playmakers that if they can tie it together with this offense that's running the ball better than anybody, by far, they're the best red zone offense in football. Lamar might be playing the best of any quarterback in the league. He might be the MVP again this year. I think they have the best coordinated offense and scheme that they've ever had in the Lamar Jackson era. Zay Flowers is the best receiver I think Lamar has ever had. Rashad Bateman is playing the best ball of his career. They added Deontay Johnson. We'll see if he can add something. They've got two tight ends. They've got Justice Hill to catch the ball. They're adding Mitchell back to the backfield. This offense is just like a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. So they could score 40 points on you. The reason I would be a little concerned is their defense, but I think their offense is so good that it doesn't really matter. I will say that the defense, they are 10th in score percentage allowed. So I will say that that's one stat that they can look at and be like, okay, we're pretty good once we get down there in the red zone, but they just allow so many yards. But they've also played a tough schedule to finish off the Ravens. Cincinnati twice, Washington, Buffalo, Dallas, Kansas City, Tampa Bay. Those are really good offenses. Okay, really good offenses that they've had to face. They have struggled a little bit, but they've been able to overcome it and still have a good record. The final team that I would consider a big-time contender is actually the Philadelphia Eagles. So I went with the Eagles over the 49ers for now and the Houston Texans. And yes, the Eagles have played a little bit of an easy schedule. So it's hard to determine how dominant and how good this team is, but they're top 7 in points for and against. And what really has me convinced about the Eagles, two things. Saquon Barkley and the running game. They can run the ball as well and as consistently as any team not named the Lions in the NFL. And that's just a huge factor. They can control a game. They can chew clock. They can play from ahead. Their defense is also playing phenomenal football. They are phenomenal right now. They're first in net yards per attempt defensively through the air, and they're also first in first downs allowed. Their defense is dominating. Now, they are playing the Browns with Deshaun Watson, the Giants, the Bengals, which was the tough one, Jacksonville, and Dallas, because Cincinnati has a very good offense. That was probably their most impressive showing. But I like the Eagles because despite, I think, Jalen Hurts struggling at times as a passer, he's dynamic as a rusher. They've got superhuman offensive talent. Like, A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley, Devontae Smith, even the offensive line, Lane Johnson, right? The defense, they're very well coached right now. And these young guys, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, they're balling out. Zach Bond at linebacker has been a revelation. Like, they're coming together as a unit, as a top 5 defense in football. So I really like that well-rounded nature. If Hurts can pick his game up and drop back pass a little bit, they could go to the Super Bowl and maybe win it this year for sure. So let's transfer to my favorite segment of the day. Before we get to the Pretenders, guys, we got to shout out the guys that really balled out on Sunday. It's time for the Quest for Greatness presented by MetaQuest. Whatever you're into, whether it's movies, gaming, or fitness, get more into it with MetaQuest. These are 3 players that completed that quest for greatness on Sunday. Special shout out to the guys that played on Thursday. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Lamar Jackson. That was a wild game. But I want to begin a location that I never expected to see the NFL growing up. That's Germany. And a kid from Canada balled out in Germany. Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers had an awesome game. And he's probably right now like the most underrated running back in football. Did you know that Hubbard is 3rd in the NFL in rushing yards? Did you know that? He has 818 rushing yards on the season. He's been fantasy explosive each and every week in your lineup. And in this game against the G-Men, he's a huge reason they won the game. Their defense stepped up in the first half. Bryce Young managed the game, but Hubbard was the engine to this victory against the Giants in Germany. 28 attempts, 153 yards, 5.5 yards per carry, and a touchdown on the ground with 4 catches through the air. Hubbard completed the quest for greatness. The second player that I thought balled out this week was Kyler Murray with the best quarterback performance of the week. And this is Kyler Murray, right? He's capable each and every week of being the best football player that you watched on any given Sunday. It's just stringing it together is the problem with Kyler Murray. But in this game against the Jets, he had no problems. He had 1 passing touchdown, 2 rushing touchdowns, 22 for 24, 266, and 21 yards rushing. He had 2 incompletions. He had more touchdowns than incompletions. And he's 3-0 since Call of Duty came out, so you can stop the memes. The third player that completed the quest for greatness is Carlton Davis. Huge reason the Detroit Lions came back against the Texans. 2 interceptions. 1 was a beautiful jumped route underneath the football, snagged it away on the first possession of the second half. That's absolutely massive for a comeback, right? Getting that interception right to start that second half, get that jolt of energy. Dan Campbell even called it before that. And then the second interception, he's not even covering the guy in the end zone. He runs all the way across the field. He picks it off. And that was a game-changing point. Those 2 points in the game were why the Lions won the game. Start this second half, they get that ball in Texan territory. They go down, they score a touchdown. Then later on, Carlton Davis rejects that touchdown to extend the Texans' lead. That allowed the Lions to win this game. So to me, Carlton Davis, MVP of the Detroit Lions comeback on Sunday Night Football. So that was the quest for greatness presented by MetaQuest, guys. Let us know which player you thought balled out on Sunday. Vinny says the Eagles haven't won against a good team, though. Yeah, I don't really deny that. We're going to see on Thursday Night Football how they do against the Commanders. I would actually favor them in that game. I would say they did beat the Packers, which is where I'm going to go next, right? Like, the Packers, I would consider a good team, but I would also consider them an honorable mention or dishonorable mention for my pretender list, okay? So why would a team be a pretender? It's because they're missing something. There's some reason I don't believe in them. There's a flaw. There's multiple flaws. There's a strength of schedule problem that I have. So I mentioned the Packers here as a pretender because if you really look at it, they've won just as many games with Malik Willis as they have with Jordan Love. And I'm just going to sit there for a second. And it wasn't against impressive teams. Jordan Love has not lived up to expectations this year individually. Like, you may look at his stats and you'll be like, oh yeah, he's throwing a lot of touchdowns. When you really dive into the games, there's a lot of inconsistency in his accuracy, in his reads, in his down-to-down efficiency with Jordan Love and the offense in general. The defense is also very inconsistent. So I would just say the main theme for the Packers and the reason they are a pretender right now, I'm not saying because I was very high on them before the year. I had them going to the NFC Championship before the season. So I was very high on them, and they could still make that happen. There's no doubt about it. Love at his best can ball out. The defense has a lot of talent. McKinney has been awesome for them. Rashawn Gary's a beast. Kenny Clark's a beast. Alexander's a beast. They've got a lot of talent, okay? But that inconsistency on both sides of the ball, failure to stop the run at times, failure to be consistent in the passing game at times, that is why I think they're a pretender right now. They can't really put it together. They lost the Lions and the Vikings in their own division. My other dishonorable mention in the NFC, this team I would have never even expected to be talking about in terms of week 10 in the NFL, post week 10 in the NFL as a potential contender. But the Arizona Cardinals, they're a bit of a pretender. I do think these next few weeks, they're going to drop a couple games within their own division, potentially, and they'll probably take themselves out of this division race. I have to say that Kyler has been playing really, really well for the most part. I love their running game. I think their offense, Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. are awesome football players. And I think the coaching staff is doing an extremely admirable job. I was definitely wrong about Jonathan Gannon overall as a coach. Do I think he's like the best coach in the league? No, but I think he's definitely improved and definitely taken this team to a place I didn't think they would be. But their defense to me is just not talented enough. I don't think they can dominate a game, steal a game. They're aggressive. They play hard. I just think against actual good teams, not the New York Jets and washed Aaron Rodgers, they're going to look a little bit more exposed, especially on that side of the football. And, you know, when you look at these last 2 weeks where the Cardinals hype has been brought up and extended, the Bears, who just lost to the Patriots by like 2 scores, and the Jets, who also lost to the Patriots. Just saying. So, Cardinals, I'm just not quite believing it. Now, moving to the real pretender list. These are more so teams that I think people actually consider potential contenders. They're going to make the playoffs pretty comfortably, I think, all of these teams. But I just don't see them going anywhere. The first of which is the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons lost to the New Orleans Saints. I don't know how much I have to say. Okay? They lost to Rizzy and the Saints. The Saints were awful before this game. And I understand division foe on the road, all that stuff. But the Falcons have been kind of getting away with it over the last few weeks, have they not? Like, they've gotten multiple comeback wins that were like unreasonable. They probably should have lost to both the Eagles and the Bucks in those comebacks, right? There's games where their defense just doesn't show up and they've still won somehow. Like, they can't get any pressure defensively. This is another game where they got next to no pressure against a banged up Saints offensive line. Their run game is awesome. Cousins has been good for them. He's definitely risen their level of an offense. Drake London and Mooney have played their best football of their careers. Kyle Pitts has been rejuvenated. Bijan has been the best we've seen him in these first 2 seasons. Their offense is legitimately pretty good. Is it special? No, it's not special. Cousins can't move in the pocket. He can't extend plays. They're limited from an offensive standpoint because of that. And I think good defenses and good coordinators do expose that at times. Like even Seattle did that. And then on defense, they're just not that good. I mean, they can't stop the pass. They can't get to the quarterback. Their run defense is inconsistent. So for me, the Falcons, they're kind of benefiting from a weak division. They'll probably make the playoffs because of a weak division. They actually have a tougher schedule than Tampa down the stretch. So we'll see how that race kind of sorts out. The second team that I would say is a pretender is the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings, they've been good pretty much all year. They have been worse as of late, though. Even in their recent wins against the Colts and the Jags, they were not convincing. If you actually watch that Jacksonville game, The Vikings had 40 minutes of possession and 28 first downs, and I think they won by like 5 points. I don't know how that's even possible. They had 28 first downs and 40 minutes of possession, guys. They had 400 yards. Why was the game close? Sam Darnold. He threw the ball to the other team 3 times, twice in the red zone. Like, the Vikings, I just can't believe Sam Darnold is going to do anything against great teams in the playoffs. Like, I like Sam. He's solid. He's been great for the Vikings this year. He's playing the best ball of his career. But in combination with him making some boneheaded decisions in these last couple of games, like, you look at his numbers the last couple of games, he has, I think, 5 interceptions in these last 2 weeks. He's actually taken 3 sacks in 6 of 6 games this season. Like 3+ sacks Sam Darnold has taken. Part of that's on him. Part of that's on the offensive line. They lost Christian Darrisaw against the Rams. Huge injury. They tried to replace him with Cam Robinson. I don't think it's exactly worked out to the same degree. So their O-line is much worse. Their quarterback is erratic. And combine that with a defense that overall is excellent, but they do give up a ton of yards. To the best offenses they've played, they've allowed a lot of yardage. They allowed 396 yards to the Niners. They won that game. They allowed 465 yards to the Packers. They still managed to win that game. 391 yards against the Lions, they lost. And then 386 yards to the Rams, they lost. But you look at the best offenses they've played, they've given up around 400 yards a game. Now, the reason I say that is you can get away with playing aggressive, pressure, sack, turnover-based defense when you play bad quarterbacks and bad offenses. But eventually, when you play a good offense like the Lions, they're not going to give you the ball. They're not going to turn it over. And they're just going to score in the red zone. Like the Niners, they didn't score in the red zone. They lost. The Packers, they turned it over. That's why they lost. But the Rams and Lions, they played mistake-free. And actually, I think Stafford threw a pick. And they won the games because you can slice and dice the Viking defense. You just got to be able to not turn it over and score in the red zone. And those 2 factors of the inconsistency quarterback, inconsistency defensively between the 20s has me a little bit concerned about Minnesota. The Steelers are a good but not great team. That's why I would consider them a pretender. I think they have an excellent defense, and I'm not really going to say anything about the defense because I think they're awesome. I think their pass rush is fantastic. Joey Porter is great. Their safeties are awesome. Their linebackers are improving with each and every week. Pat Queen had a phenomenal game against the Commanders. But their offense is just so like, erratic's not the right word. I don't even know what to say. They're so reliant on one trick. They're a one-trick pony. Russell Wilson just draws back and throws the ball up 50 yards straight up in the air, and then George Pickens like does a spinorama in the air and catches it with like 2 fingers. And that's like their best source of offense. I just don't think that's going to work against the Bills and the Chiefs. It might work against the Ravens the way they're playing pass defense. We'll see next week. Right, but the Steelers always beat the Ravens at least once. Okay, so it won't work against the Texans. All right, the Steelers, you can't just throw the ball up. Their offensive line, pass blocking wise, pretty inefficient. Their overall drop back passing game, pretty inefficient. It's just their offense. They're just a one-dimensional team. And then you look at their schedule, and they've benefited off a weak schedule, right? Their wins are against Washington, their best win by far, and that was 28-27. They beat the Giants and the Jets, the Raiders, the Chargers when Herbert got hurt, the Broncos in Bo Nix's second start, and that was ugly, and the Falcons in Kirk Cousins' first game off an Achilles. So those are their wins. Their losses, they lost the Colts and the Cowboys. They haven't even really played an elite team, in my opinion. They've played some decent teams, like some good teams, like the Chargers, like the Broncos. These teams, Falcons, they could make the playoffs. Washington is their best win. But Washington, to me, is also a pretender. Washington is also a pretender. The chat is saying, I agree, one-trick ponies about the Steelers. Steelers are better than the Ravens. I do not agree with that, Andrew. I'm sorry. Ravens have lost 7 of the last 8 to the Steelers. They own Lamar. Steelers are a contender. See, I don't think that one individual matchup means that you're a contender. I don't think you beating the Ravens means you're a contender, because what if you face the Chiefs? What if you face the Bills? Or if you face the Texans, are you going to win those games? I'm not sure. I don't think so. A Red Skull says the Steelers are a first-round exit. Pittsburgh and Washington are the best teams in the NFL. Okay, that's crazy. Let's talk about why the Commanders are not the best team in the NFL. Okay, they lost the Steelers, first of all. So that's first evidence. Second evidence is we talked about the Steelers' schedule and who they've benefited on playing. The Commanders, it's even worse. They're a schedule vulture, right? But let's just say, like, okay, they weren't expected to be here, which is why the Commanders are being thrusted up so far in our thoughts. Jaden Daniels, Rookie of the Year. Yes. Dan Quinn, Coach of the Year with Cliff Kingsbury. Yeah, probably. But let's just look at how good of a team they are. Who have they played? Who have they beaten, right? They have played Carolina, Chicago, the Giants, the Browns with Deshaun Watson, the Giants again. They have 2 wins against the Giants. Their best wins are when they went to Cincinnati on Monday night and they won and they were leading the entire game. That's a great win. And they shellacked the Cardinals. And we just talked about the Cardinals. They're more of a pretender than a contender. And the Bengals are below 500 football team. Those are their best wins. They've played 3 good teams, or like 3 teams that when they're healthy, they're good, because Tampa, they lost to in week 1. And they played Pittsburgh, they lost. They played Baltimore, they lost. So they played Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Tampa. 3 teams you would consider maybe pretty good. Cincinnati, I would also consider like pretty good when they're healthy, but those are their best teams they've played. Those are the best teams. And then defensively, I think they've been benefiting from playing bad offenses like Carolina and those type of teams, the Giants, right? Like that's why their defense is kind of like looking better than I think people think it is. You know, most people think they would look. 31st in run defense, yards per attempt though, which I think is a problem because they can't control the game if other teams are running the ball on them, especially when you look at the NFC. You've got to play the Packers, the Lions, the Eagles, teams that can run the ball, potentially the Niners, right? Like teams that can really run the ball on you. That's going to be a problem. Their red zone offense has been a problem even in games where they played bad teams, like against the Giants. Their red zone offense has been a problem. The Bears, that was a problem that game as well. Their red zone defense is a little bit of a problem too. So their red zone play overall, and I just think the more tape that comes out on Jaden Daniels, the more exposure that this team gets on film to their schemes and what's working and what's not, their talent is just going to be exposed more and more and more. So they could prove me wrong if they beat a team like the Eagles. That would make me think that they're more of a good, like a legit, maybe they can win a playoff game or something like that. But I just don't see how they string together 3 playoff wins, 4 playoff wins throughout a course of a playoff schedule. Aaron says, yeah, I don't know how many is calling the Steelers a contender. They lost to the Cowboys. Actually, you would be surprised. A lot of people are calling the Steelers a contender because it's Mike Tomlin. It's the Steeler defense. It's TJ Watt, Russell Wilson. Like people buy into Russell Wilson coming back and playing like better than he did last year. And he's a big name and a big personality. So to me, like, yeah, I mean, these are teams that I think are going to make the playoffs. Like the Steelers 100% are going to make the playoffs. They have a really tough schedule down the stretch, but I still think they're going to easily make the playoffs, and people will probably pick them maybe to win a playoff game. So that's why I have them on the pretender list. The final pretender is the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers are the last team. And this one, to me, if you've just watched the Chargers play, they're a classic team that is well coached. They don't beat themselves, and they have a good quarterback. And that's their team. Like, that's why they're winning games against teams that are not very good, because they don't beat themselves. They run the ball, they stop the run, and Herbert makes some crazy throws. But you look at who they've played. Again, they're a team that can beat teams that are worse than them, which is something the Chargers have not always been able to do in their franchise history. But now with Harbaugh, they're able to do that. They beat teams like the Raiders, the Panthers, the Saints, the Browns, the Titans, even the Broncos. Those are their wins. Their best win is against the Broncos, who no one thought was going to be any good this year. And I think they're a 500 football team. They've lost to every decent team they've played, kind of like the Commanders. They lost the Steelers, the Chiefs, and the Cardinals, right? So they have problems in terms of, I think their defense has not been exposed to actual good offenses this year. And I want to see them play actual good offenses, which I'm not sure how many times we're going to see them play them. So that might not come until the playoffs. And then their skill talent offensively just holds Justin Herbert back from being the truly awesome quarterback that he is. And the offense could be a lot better if they had a receiver or two, or if they had a stud tight end or a stud running back. They have none of those things. They're just a bunch of guys out there that Herbert's making look good, in my opinion. So, yeah, I just don't think the Chargers have the offensive talent, and they've played a pretty weak schedule, and they failed every test that they've actually had this season. Steelers are a different team with Russ at quarterback. Anybody who's watched them knows this. I agree. I think they're a different team. I think they're a better team. Definitely. Russell Wilson's better than Justin Fields. There's no doubt about it. Passing game's better, more explosive. Do I think that they are going to be able to, with the way they play offense, be able to string together multiple victories in the playoffs? I don't think so. I just don't think so. I think their defense is very good. I don't think it's historic. They still gave up yards and points to some decent teams this year, including the Commanders. I know one of the touchdowns was because of a fake punt that they failed at their own 10-yard line, but still, like, this team is going to have to, for them to make a run in the playoffs, the Steelers, they're going to have to dominate on defense because Russ is not going to be able to string together long drives. It's pretty much like a couple moon balls a game. That's their entire offense and a little bit of a running game. And I just think teams like the Chiefs and teams like the Bills are just going to knock that right out. Like, it's just not going to, I just don't think they're a factor, in my opinion. T. Smith says Steelers have a cupcake schedule, pretender for sure. Hayden says crazy how the Jets would have been on one of these lists, but now are not at all. Yeah, I mean, they didn't have a chance to make this list because they have not performed to this point. That's why we're making this list in week 10, right? We've got to see how the teams have played so far. If you're a pretender, it technically means that you're outdoing expectations. You're perhaps a team that looks like they're a contender, but for some reason they're not. You can't even put the Jets on this list. They're so bad. You can't even put the Jets on this list, right? All right, recapping the lists for the Super Bowl contenders, my honorable mentions, I've got the 49ers and the Houston Texans, one in the NFC, one in the AFC. Both of these teams, I think, could make the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. It depends on health, and it depends on if they can fix flaws with their team. For the Niners, red zone offense. For the Texans, offensive line play. The 5 contenders. The Lions are the top team in the NFC. The Eagles, the second team in the NFC. In the AFC, the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Ravens. Mahomes, Allen, Lamar. Okay? Those are the contenders. For the pretenders list, my dishonorable mentions, the Cardinals and the Green Bay Packers. The Packers might be the most controversial. I just feel like both sides of the ball have been a little bit too inconsistent, and I want to see them beat a good team this year. The 5 pretenders: Falcons, Vikings, Steelers, for different reasons. Falcons defense, Vikings quarterback, Steelers, I would say offense overall, Commanders, strength of schedule, Chargers, overall talent and strength of schedule. Those are my pretenders and my contenders after week 10 of the 2024 NFL season. That was your Monday morning reaction presented by MetaQuest. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Mitch. We'll see you next Monday. Peace.